when the Euro-Americans were moving the indigenous people from the southeast to Oklahoma, they
Right.
didn't really care whom they were moving to Oklahoma, right? It was not people of one ethnicity. It may have been people of different ethnicities that they were moving.
Well, the Cherokee were so big that we were specifically moved in a couple of different groups, but as an aggregate, it was necessary to get us out of there. Georgia had discovered gold, and it felt necessary for them to have that gold, so they needed Cherokees out of their land. So we were basically moved at bayonet point from the southeast into Oklahoma. And
So were the people when they were moved, apart from the fact, of course, that they were moved from their ancestral lands forcibly, were were they able to maintain their identities and their cultures? So
it varies. So larger tribes, the Creek, the Cherokee, the Seminole, um, Choctaw, and Chickasaw, maintained their cultures, but a lot of people died on that trip. Their illness. It was one of the trips the Cherokee were on to get there. Were was in the coldest summer anybody ever had known, and they ended up stranded on the banks of the Mississippi River in this horrible muddy space. A lot of people died along the way. Um, at that time, and this is an unpopular viewpoint, but it's mine and it's the story I was told. At that time, a lot of enslaved peoples,
so African Americans?
yeah, had African Americans and African American Native people who had also been enslaved. Um, some of them were formerly enslaved, and some of them were um, enslaved by Cherokee citizens. This is a situation that was subject of much debate within the Cherokee Nation. Don't have to take my word for it. You can read our old newspapers about it. People held slaves. People loathed the idea of holding slaves, and it varied from person to person. So it's not quite accurate to say the nation enslaved people, individuals enslaved people, according to the laws that the Euro-American settlers had brought in. But some of the people who were there had been previously enslaved and then had escaped to tribal communities, and then became neighbors and functional members of the community. And until people wanted to track our bloodlines, that was a perfectly acceptable way to become a member of the community. And what I was taught was that people would not have survived if it hadn't been for those who did not have to be relocated but chose to come along because they had developed community, and without their help a lot more people would have died. So folks settle in to northeastern Oklahoma, and there's an exhaustive amount of history available about that. And then there's a theory that the U.S. government had basically staged some outlawry in order to justify taking over those spaces. My great-grandmother's brother had been attacked when he went into town to buy supplies by a guy who was clearly there to start a fight. All of the witnesses say that he picked a fight and he wasn't drunk. He was absolutely clear about the whole thing. And but her brother brought a gun to a knife fight and came out on top of that, and then was tried for it, and was found innocent, which was not common. And thereafter, a man named Ned Christie, who they will call an outlaw if you look him up online, but he was quite a hero. The people who knew him, he was a Cherokee council member. He was an important man, and he was related to my grandmother as well. He was framed for a murder, and if you look him up online, one of the photos you'll find of him is him shot, leaned up against a door with a whole bunch of white guys looking like they had just shot a big elephant or something. And that's findable online. The history is what it is.
So just to follow up on my earlier question, so there was a time, though, later when Native Americans were allowed to leave the reservation and live outside of the reservation?
Well, not just allowed. As the desire to, as a perceived need to protect people from us waned, and the desire to not have responsibilities to any of the treaties or agreements that had been come to sort of blossomed even more.
They were mostly violated anyway, the treaties.
They were mostly violated, but there are still some things, right? So Indian Health Services get the medical care. It went through phases of being particularly crappy medical care, but it was available. A commodity food also available, generally cheese, rice, really bad meat, fish in cans that are like heads and tails and stuff, like not really edible, which justified people not getting to hunt off their areas. Right? So now you don't have to go hunt. We'll make sure you have what you need.
So basically you are eliminating self-reliance and self-sufficiency of the indigenous population and telling them, look, eat what we give you.
And then comes a moment where it's, well, now we want you to have self-determination, so we'll hand your children, your adult children, tickets to major cities. So Minneapolis, LA, San Francisco, places like this. They relocated a bunch of Native people with the promise that they'd find them jobs and places to live, and no such thing existed, so they shipped a bunch of people out. There are a lot of people still around who were part of that, on top of which you've got boarding schools and other things.